Good morning and welcome to Meet the Candidates 2021 for New York City Mayor. I'm Kathleen Culhane, President of Non-Traditional Employment for Women and Board Chair of the New York City Employment and Training Coalition. And this morning, we have the pleasure of sitting down with Ray McGuire for the 8th of our scheduled conversations with the publicly announced candidates. Thank you to the members and partners that have joined us to hear from the candidate. NYCETC supports the workforce development community to ensure that every New Yorker has access to the skills, training, and education needed to thrive in the local economy, and that every business is able to maintain a highly skilled workforce. NYCETC's membership is comprised of nearly 180 workforce providers, educational institutions, and labor management organizations that provide job training and employment services to nearly 600,000 New Yorkers, making us the largest city-based workforce development coalition in the country. Thank you again for being with us this morning, and I'll now hand it over to our CEO, Jose Ortiz Jr., to begin the program.
Thank you, Kathleen. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Again, my name is Jose Ortiz Jr., and I'm the CEO of the New York City Employment and Training Coalition. Before we get started, all participants should know that you'll be muted for the duration of this call. Mr. McGuire will be provided an opportunity to talk to us about his candidacy and answer some questions in a fireside format. We'll then open it up for a few questions from several members and partners. Please type your questions along with your name, title, and organization throughout the conversation using the chat icon located on the bottom panel. If you're called upon to ask your question, we will unmute you so that you may ask your question directly to our guest. Please note that we'll try our best to get to as many questions as time will allow. I want to thank Mr. McGuire for being here today and for his leadership. And before we get started, I want to provide a little bit of background. Ray McGuire was born and raised in Dayton, Ohio. He received degrees from Harvard Business School and Harvard Law School. McGuire moved to New York City to continue his career in investment banking and corporate finance. He was one of the original members of Wasserstein, Perella & Company, and worked at several firms before moving to Citigroup in 2005, where he worked as the head of global corporate and investment banking. During the last 13 years in this role, Ray became the longest tenured head of investment banking in the history of Wall Street. McGuire was also named as a candidate to serve as the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York in 2018, and a candidate for the position in the United States Department of Treasury in 2013. McGuire has served on several boards and advisory committees, including the New York Presbyterian Hospital, New York Public Library, the Whitney Museum, and the Studio Museum in Harlem. In December, McGuire launched his campaign to run for the mayor of New York City in the 2021 mayoral election. Ray, I want to thank you again for being here with us this morning. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you decided to jump into the race.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you, Kathleen. I am really honored to be with you all this morning. This is such an important organization that it really does touch the most important part of this city, many of the more marginalized parts of the city. So let me tell you a little bit about me, because I come from that kind of marginalized background. You referenced that I come from Dayton, Ohio. I indeed do come from Dayton, Ohio. Jose, I come from the other side of the tracks, where I was raised by my single mother. I didn't know my father. And my single mother, along with my grandparents, raised me and my two brothers. And at any point in time, we had half a dozen or so foster children in our home. And my mother was a social worker. And so I know what it's like when you live in those circumstances to overhear the conversations about whether or not we're going to pay the gas and electric bill, which is that Dayton Power and Light, or whether or not she's going to put food on the table, or whether or not she's going to put tithes in the church. And so I know what that's like. I know what it's like to wash tin foil. I know what it's like to get to the end of the bar of soap and you get to a lot of them. So you put them all together and then you convince yourself that you have a full bar of soap. So I know what it's like not to have any money. And I know what it's like to experience those struggles. And through the sacrifices of my mother and my grandparents, she referenced, I was able to go on and get a good education. I started getting bused from my home when I was in the 6th grade, 11th grade. Teacher said, if you're as good as they say you are, go to the East Coast. So I took a Greyhound bus around New England by myself at 16, looking for education. I landed at a school in Connecticut and then applied to colleges and been able to get into Harvard College. And then I went on to law school and business school. And when I got to New York, Jose, I had 3 things. I had a great education, I had a lot of debt, and I had no money. And so New York City's been great to me. It's been a place where I met my wife and where we're raising our 3 kids. Leo, who is 8, Ella, who's 18, who just finished her college applications, and Cole, who was 20, who earlier was drafted in the 1st round by the NBA into the NBA, and is now the starting point guard for the Orlando Magic. So we are so fortunate, and this city's been great to us. And so the reason I'm running is because I love this city. This city has been good to us, and it has allowed me to come and compete in one of the most competitive fields that exist anywhere, and do that locally and nationally and globally. And I'm so, so fortunate. But you know, the thing that I want, Jose, I want other kids to have the same opportunity that I had. And so I've tried to invest so much in the city, and especially those kids who look like you and me.
Thank you for that. It's important, I think, for everyone to get a sense of the candidate's background. So really appreciate you sharing those details.
Thank you.
As you mentioned earlier, you officially launched your campaign for mayor in December 2021. As you know very well, as does everyone on this call and across our membership and partnerships, over the last 10 months, the world has changed dramatically, especially this specific city. The health, the economic toll of COVID-19, as well as the social movements and for social and economic justice that occurred over the spring and the summer, and continue to over the last many months. How did these 2 specific moments in terms of the social movements, as well as the economic and health toll of COVID-19, play a role into your decision to jump into the race?
You know, that's a great question. Before I left city, before I took the final decision, I was fortunate to write the foreword to what I think is a pretty definitive study on the economic impact of 400 years of systemic inequities. And what it highlighted was the systemic inequities in healthcare, in education, in the economy, and in the criminal justice system. And what it identified, Jose, was that if we had addressed any of those over the past 20 years, the impact on the US economy was $16 trillion. $16 trillion. And what COVID and George Floyd, that 8 minutes and 46 seconds, 6 seconds of a cold-blooded murder, what they showed, it was a big reveal. It is things that you all have been working on for years. It's just that COVID and George Floyd have uncovered them, all the systemic inequities that we're trying to address, that you all are trying to address. It put it front and center so that the world could see what many of us were experiencing for years. And what the study goes on to show is that if we begin to address it now, that's an additional $5 trillion to the US economy. So we have the statistic, we know the impact. We need to be able to address those inequities today, because COVID has identified that this thing it has gone through these communities, gone through our communities at a disproportionate amount. And unless we do something about it, the crisis is only going to grow larger. And so that has, yes, it informed a lot about the decision about why we do this, but these conditions existed before that decision. And the decision just gets highlighted even more. The importance of that decision is highlighted more and more, which is why I decided to run.
Thank you. So we're going to talk a little bit more specifically now around the impact of the job losses on New York City. Yep. And the state. It's been an incredibly difficult time over the last year, and we are within our work specifically, as you know, we're at the forefronts of that and seeing the impact of so many people being laid off and looking for work and opportunities to be retrained and reskilled in order to meet the needs of the new employment sector. We have 1.25 million New Yorkers face unemployment, and specifically around 900,000 of those were private sector and government jobs in the early days of the crisis. Around 330,000 independent contractors filed for pandemic unemployment assistance. And as of December, the unemployment rate in the city stood at 12.1%, which is significantly higher than the rest of the state and nationally. In the state, 5.7, nationally 6.7. So I guess the question is for you, how do you plan to address that significantly higher toll that the pandemic has had on the city?
So Jose, those numbers are disturbing. What we know is that in many of our communities, those numbers are really understated. It could be double digits in many of these communities. And so what I have done in my plan, which I have titled the greatest economic comeback plan in the history of the city, and I must say that part of what I'm fortunate to be able to do is talk to people like you and Kathleen, and to look at the work that you all have done, and to get informed, to have my policies informed by what you all have done. So they look at all the work, and you look at my plan here. And I have a plan called Go Big, Go Forward. But let me just go big, go small, go forward. Let me give you some of the specifics. Part of what we know is that half of the businesses, half of the employees in New York work for small businesses. They are amongst the ones who have been the most hard hit in this. And what I plan to do is part of that plan is to have a jobs accelerator. What do I mean by that? 50,000 jobs that we intend to do to provide the following services for. So this just kickstarts the economy. I don't mean something like a sugar rush, but something that puts an adrenaline into the economy. 50,000 jobs, small businesses, where we give 50% of a worker's compensation that we take care of, 50% of a worker's compensation. And then what I want to do is to make certain that all the small businesses retain their tax receipts. They can keep their tax receipts for a year. And then the other part of this is to make certain that as I listen to these small businesses say, Ray, we pay 100 cents on the dollar to our utility bill, the Con Ed. We're making 10 cents on the dollar. And so the other thing that I want to do is to make sure that we go in and give some relief on utility bill and some relief on rent bills. And I also want to make certain that that we cut the red tape, which is what we need to do to make certain that we can incentivize these small businesses to grow so they can do it more easily. So it's the job accelerator, 50,000 jobs, half of the wages that we pay with sales tax receipts. And the other thing that's really important here is to make sure that we protect the credit scores, because once the credit scores get compromised, especially in a COVID situation where we know it's going to get compromised, we need to intervene and make sure that we take care of that. The other part to this is I want to invest $100 million to retrain 15,000 members of the workforce so that they can get into the workforce in ways that they haven't. And the other part of this is I want to put $50 million into providing, I thought it was going to be low interest loans, but what I now find through more of my diligence and more of my being in the community is that so many people already have so much debt. So I want to give grants and low interest loans where necessary. And I want to give equity. And we've outlined $50 million to go to the comeback banks in the local communities to provide that. And the other thing we need tutorials. We need in a digital divide, we need to train our people and give them the information. So those are some of the highlights that I have and how we're going to put adrenaline into this system and accelerate job creation, which is so desperately needed, which you all identify. And many of the ideas that we have are mirroring those plans. We got to get people back to work. My plan is to get people back to work.
That's great. And we'll come back to a few of those points that you mentioned, because obviously with regards to cutting the red tape and the digital divide, those are obviously pressing needs for our community. But as you know, over the summer, we released a report that we called Recovery for All, which was a vision set of recommendations from over 80 leaders in the private and human services sectors here in the city that centered around small business and workforce development, particularly for the displaced workers and marginalized communities that you've already referenced. Were there any recommendations that stood out to you as you were crafting your report and/or your agenda for the administration?
The answer is, yeah. If you look at what we did on the comeback job accelerator that I mentioned, is a wage subsidy program, which I know is something that you support. I know you've advocated for the expanded bridge programs to help prepare people who may be more difficult, and it may be more difficult in finding a good paying job. As I referenced, I'm committed to raising and investing $100 million a year to provide New Yorkers with a seat in the bridge programs. I looked at the statistics and what you outlined and the number of people who have a high school degree or less. We need to provide bridge services so they can get into the training programs. So 15,000 that we would pay for in order for them to do this. And your report talks about infrastructure and the need to create accessible jobs. You will note that my plan identifies an aggressive infrastructure program, which is accelerate spending on shovel-ready projects and to include kind of newly designed, fully embedded workforce development program inside of my infrastructure plan. And so that also includes, the infrastructure plan also includes what I know you've identified and what's so important is broadband. We got 1.5 million New Yorkers who lack access. So broadband is a large part of my infrastructure plan. And I also saw removing the obstacles that we've talked about for small businesses. And that's a fundamental part of the jobs program. You got to get rid of the obstacles. Small businesses have to become clients of the city. And small business administration, which today is a bit dysfunctional, I'll clean that up. That is a primary focus. I'm going to have a small business, probably deputy mayor for small businesses to make certain that we focus on this.
It's great to hear. So we're going to move on to another question. And this one is specifically around one of our more recent initiatives that we're excited to share more details on early next week, in fact. In November, we created a partnership with two friends, which are phenomenal organizations in housing and urban planning, the Association for Neighborhood Housing and Development, or ANHD, and Regional Plan Association, or RPA. And we announced the creation of an initiative called the New York City Inclusive Growth Initiative, which is a plan to create a steering committee of applicants that is representative of the diversity that is New York City in terms of race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, immigration, lots of other areas that are often not necessarily considered when it comes to these planning efforts. And so, our goal is to create an agenda here that is focused on good jobs, retaining and expanding affordable housing, and driving the economy forward while reducing the structural inequities and increasing access to opportunity. So if you can, just tell us about your plans to make the city more inclusive. And you've highlighted a number of pieces here, but when thinking about this, how do you define inclusive growth is one of our questions. And what role specifically does workforce play in that definition?
Jose, inclusive growth, we've talked about this for so long, and we failed miserably at it for so long. What does inclusive growth mean? It means very specifically that businesses owned by people of color and women receive a fair share of city spending. One example of this is if you look at some of the material that the city prepared, the goal for construction contract awards to minority and women-owned businesses was 8%. By the last calculation, it was somewhere between 0.5 and 0.7%. And so those numbers identify quite directly how we have so failed at this. And so what I'm prepared to do is use what will be the mayor's discretionary powers to advance large city projects only if they have a clear path to providing contracts and dollars to the underrepresented communities, the maximum extent allowable by law. And I'm committed to that through my discretionary powers as mayor. The level playing field is also going to be focused on leadership from the top. It's going to have a different approach to the MWBE. And this is how we're going to fund and have professional development, small businesses, so they can compete for the contracts. And I'm going to work with the not-for-profit and the private sectors to get job training programs and CUNY career services into what should be a unified job training program. Today, it is not that. And I'm going to use data to pair the worker skills and the interests with all the programs and the jobs that are available locally. The other thing that we need to do is we need to connect small businesses to additional supports, legal services, back office, grant and loan resources. And part of the challenge, as you know, Jose, is that people don't have access to that. And some of this reflects the digital divide. And so I intend to hold in the communities in different languages at a designated time in a designated location, tutorial services, mentoring programs, so that we can get the people in and train them on how they access many of these programs. And so that is, part of how I think about doing this, which is a material different to how things have been approached up to this point. A lot of lip service, just no substantive action. We got to make a change. We got to make a change.
What do you see as just some of the biggest challenges facing New York City workers and job seekers today in general, and obviously that plays into the next decade? So when you're thinking about your administration, what policies and programs do we need to enact in order to address those barriers?
You know, one of which we've talked about a little bit, which is workforce development in the community. And we have to partner with the community-based organizations to get the on-the-ground services for those who want them. Some of the business improvement districts, I think, are quite effective at this, but some need to get the support. So I was talking not so long ago to one of the leaders in the Bronx, business leaders, small business leaders in the Bronx. We talked about the programs that we as a city could provide to support the BIDs, the bids in the local communities. So we need to invest in that. We need to invest in workforce training. We need to invest in tutorials and mentorship. And these things will it gives the entrepreneurs and the small businesses in the community a way to come together and a way to get the support. And that's how I would approach this. This has got to be a priority. And I would make it a priority through things as simple as that. They're simple, but they're material and they haven't happened.
Two more questions here before we open it up to our community to ask a few questions of their own. What lessons have you learned from your professional experience, which is obviously quite unique compared to some of the other publicly announced candidates? And when thinking about those lessons, how does that approach differ from the current administration?
You know, one of the fundamental approaches here is the enormous potential in public-private partnerships. Today, we haven't had that. This divide is too great. And so small businesses and businesses have not been a priority. As a matter of fact, they've essentially been put on the sidelines. And there's been limited to no focus and certainly no investment of any significant amount. System's dysfunctional. And what my experience has shown me is that when you do have those partnerships, when you have the collaboration, when you have the focus, and when you have the right people at the table, like you and like Kathleen, and people who are your peers who are dedicated to this, you can make a difference, but you got to show the commitment and you have to be able to make the investment. Remember, there are a lot of people talking, but no action. And one of the things I've learned from my business career and having been in a leadership role, managing and leading for as long as I have, is that you need to bring people together. You got to have the best talent and you need to listen to the best thinkers. You know, our plans are heavily informed by the best thinking that you all have put forward. And so you need to do that. And what you know as a leader is just that. Get the best people, have a vision, and make sure that you hold people accountable so they can go execute. That's vastly different, not only to this administration, but to anybody else who's running. I have a proven track record of having done just this. And so we need to continue to focus on that. And that is a singular way to distinguish my vision, my track record from everybody else who's running. I've been about it. I'm not just talking about it. I've been about it.
So before we open it up to questions, I just want to give you, one last opportunity. Just tell us a little bit about anything that we haven't already covered that you expect to be priorities for the first 100 days of your administration.
So their priorities are going to be the greatest comeback, inclusive comeback. That's jobs. Second is, we need safety and security and quality of life. That has impacted us so profoundly. And the other is education. We need to make sure that we focus on and do whatever we can to bring education into our communities, because what this COVID has showed us is there's such a huge educational divide, and that educational divide has been made worse by the digital divide. So my first 100 days, I'm going to focus on those three things. But I got to get New York back to work. I got to improve the quality of life, and I got to get our kids educated. So they have the opportunity that I have to sit and talk to you all about my vision for this city, about my vision for how this city is going to be the most inclusive as I lead the greatest comeback.
Thank you, Ray. We're now going to open it up for some questions from our guest today. So bear with us. It does take some time to transition from time to time. We are going to start with our first question from one of our members, Angie Kameth, who is the University Dean of Continuing Education and Workforce Programs at the City University of New York.
Ooh, that's big. She's right in the middle of this. Ooh, professor. You say it's a professor, Dean nonetheless. Hello, Dean. How are we doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much, Mr. McGuire. Appreciate
Please
your
call me
time.
Ray, Professor, please.
Okay. So nice to meet you. Thank you for your time this morning. You talked about mentoring and kind of the importance of having students, have access, but would love to hear a little bit more about your vision around CUNY, around how we can really make sure that college students early on in their college career can access applied learning, internships, so that they can get prepared, as they go through and leave our system to full-time jobs. There's definitely an important equity play here. 80% of our students come from New York City public schools. Nearly 85% of our students come from communities of color, and they really represent the 33 zip codes in large part that have been so deeply affected by COVID. So I'd love to just hear a little bit more about how you think about public education, given the billions of dollars that the city does invest in CUNY, how we could be a better and stronger partner.
So CUNY is my aspiration. And how do I get there? My vision for education is what I call cradle to career, cradle to job, which means pre-K is good, as you know, Professor, but often our kids arrive at pre-K and they're behind. So what I want to do is I want to start at zero. I want to make sure that we have affordable childcare, which is part of my plan. And as you know, as these children as they're developing their learning, so from 0 to 4, I want to give childcare, toddler care, parent care, so that these kids, by the time they get to pre-K, they're prepared and they're ready. And then, Professor, what I want to do is and this is for my account, I want to make certain that by the end of the 3rd grade, every child in New York City can read and do math. Every single one. And because what we know is that between 0 and the end of the 3rd grade, our children are learning to read. After that, they're reading to learn. And if they never learn to read, then we know what's going to happen to the societal impact of that. So I want to stop it there, and I want to be held accountable. And then what I want to do, which is, I get really excited about this, is beginning at the 6th grade, we give our children exposure. I want to give them financial literacy, but I also want to give them exposure to becoming a mathematician, become a coder, becoming a programmer, becoming a welder, becoming a brick mason. Whatever it is that they want to do, I want to give them exposed to that at the 6th grade, and I want to give them a summer job, which is where my public-private partnership comes in. Because if the government can't afford it, I can access the private sector, and I know where I can call. I have the relationships that'll be able to call to get the private sector involved, so that by the time they graduate, from 6th grade on to the time they graduate, they can choose one of 3 things. They can either go into a career or job, or they can go to a 2 or 4 year college, which is where CUNY comes in, helping me design the jobs of the future, starting at the 6th grade, so that design is going to include summer jobs through the course of that. Allows our students, by the time, if they choose to go to CUNY, that they're going to be prepared, and that you don't have to go through a remedial class. And not only will they be prepared, they have some focus on how they're going to get refined by the time they get to CUNY. So CUNY is directly involved in my vision for education, but it starts at cradle and it goes to CUNY. And that's how I think about it. Remember, maybe you don't remember, but when I was growing up, I had summer job. I dug footers, I laid tile, I changed bedpans, I DC'd IVs, I made boxes in the basement of Phil's dress shop. I did all those things. I was a gopher, but you know what? It kept me out of trouble. And it gave me a view about the possibilities that existed in the world. Our children need the same thing, and we can do this, which is why my plan is so directly targeted in response to your question. Let's give them a summer job. Let's get them exposed. Let's get them to CUNY, and let CUNY help me design those programs that start at 6th grade.
Thanks, Angie. Our
Professor, how was that?
She's off. We moved on to our question. David Conliffe is the Executive Director for the Center for Community Alternatives. David, you're up.
Good morning.
Hi, David.
Nice to see you. Many nonprofits like CCA, Fortune, and Osborne favor closing Rikers and developing borough-based jails with good space for workforce development and other programs. Do you favor closing Rikers and developing borough-based jails?
The answer is I want to take a look at all of it. As I've studied jails across the country, across the world, we need to make certain that we have alternatives to Rikers. And we need to, we need to find the best way to deal with not only the incarcerated, but the formerly incarcerated. And so I want to take a look at all the options. I know there's been a lot of work that's been put into this, and I want to get closer to all the options. But what you know is that the number of vertical jails, up and down jails around the country, the number of those that have worked is we need to go through and continue to take a look at the success of those. So I want to make certain that the answer is for the formerly incarcerated, that we can re-enter them in the most productive ways, which includes prior to their release, that we get them beginning on workforce, on training and development. Because part of the societal challenge that we have is when they leave Rikers, you drop them off at 120 some odd street with $20 a Metro card. We need to drop them off so they get to a training center. And so that we give them housing. So we have transition services, which is why I think about it the way I think about it.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, David.
Our next question is from Jennifer Eiffel Ryan. Jennifer is an adjunct professor at the SUNY University of New York. Jennifer, you're up.
You got a lot of big brains here asking questions. I love this.
Good morning. Thank you.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hi. I'm wondering, you talk a lot about workforce, and I think, a lot of us are in that conversation for lots of reasons, SYEP being one of them, certainly with COVID. And I'm wondering specifically what sectors we're looking at when we're thinking about workforce development, because traditional ideas of workforce development can maintain classist ideas. So I'm interested in emerging sectors and what your thoughts are on that.
Listen, we have to train. So that's a great question. And how do I think about this? We have to train them for the jobs of today. We have to train them for the jobs of the future. Let me give you an example. And some of us have talked about, there's a program called Pursuit. And Pursuit is a program where you take people who have been offline, who make $15,000 a year, and you train them 6 to 9 months. They re-enter the workforce, making $85,000 to $95,000 a year. So here are people who have been working in an analog world, who get trained to go now be productive, relatively highly compensated people in the private sector, in the digital world. So there are plenty of programs out there that we need to invest in to scale. And the private sector has a number of jobs waiting, available for the workforce of the future. So the way I think about it is I want to train them today, those people who want to go and help the repair and build the infrastructure, and also the people who want to go and be the software engineers, and also the people who want to become medical technicians. So I want to train and who can be telemedicine experts as we address the healthcare deserts, get telemedicine experts. And I also want to get the people who can train the people in the community to understand, to bridge the digital divide. So it's the jobs of the day and the jobs of the future, and let's invest today, which is how I think about workforce training development. I need to invest. I need to continue to invest across the spectrum.
Thank you, Jennifer. Our next question is from Wayne Ho. Wayne is one of our board members here at the New York City Employment and Training Coalition. He's also the president and CEO of the Chinese American Planning Council. Wayne, you're up.
All right.
You got the professors, you got the board members, you got the presidents. Man, you guys are coming strong today. Okay, Wayne, how we doing?
Good.
Mr. President, Mr. Board Member, Wayne, what you got?
As you know, the city of New York right now contracts out about $4 billion a year in human services, and then about an additional $4 billion a year in education services. And these go to nonprofit organizations to provide critical needs. Unfortunately, contracts take up to 12 months to 18 months to get approved. It takes forever for cash advances to come. We take out lines of credit. Our staff are paid not living wages, and especially during this time, we've been doing essential work. So what would be your plans to better support the nonprofit sector around human services?
You know, that is a great question, Wayne. I was just 2 days ago talking to a woman who is providing internships for young men and women of color. And she talked about college visits and the fact that because the money had been so slow in coming that she had to take out a loan to be able to go do this. I just find that unacceptable. these are essential services. These are services that impact people's lives. And so it ought to be a higher priority. And we need to cut through the BS. We need to accelerate the payment. It shouldn't be the case that you and others have to go and put personal credit at risk just because of a year's delay in payment. One of the things that I know running the business is that, payments on time are essential to how these businesses operate. And I would make certain and commit to making sure that we cut through the frickin' red tape to get people paid so that they can get these programs, these programs. You shouldn't be exposed personally. In the not-for-profits that have been funded ought to get funded directly. If we set them up and we're going to support them, let's support them. And I know as a business person how to get this done because I've managed budgets. I've managed budgets larger than state budgets. And you know what happens in my world, Wayne? If you don't manage a budget, don't stay that long. And so part of this is performance. We got to perform. We got to hold our people accountable. It is not acceptable for you to have to wait 1 year to get bills paid. How's that crazy? That's not the way the world should work. It's not going to work on my watch. There's nothing I've ever been involved with, especially in my leadership, my business management leadership, that is ever going to take a year. You'll last about a day with about a year's extension in how you execute on something. That's not possible. That's where the skill set is so important. You wouldn't have that exposure when it comes to me. You'd get your bills paid and not-for-profits will get funded.
Great. Thank you very much, Ray. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Our next question is actually from Annie, who you know is our Vice President for Policy and Special Initiatives. Annie, you're up.
Hi, Annie.
Oh, sorry, running tech and asking questions. Nice to see you, Annie Garniva, with the Employment Training Coalition. And so you've talked a lot about kind of overarching ideas that really kind of what we try to drive the system toward from that approach. But we also focus on developing new jobs and really trying to push the city to understand that part of workforce development is also ensuring that you're building out sectors and that talent is a necessary component of how you attract jobs and build jobs. So to that end, given the giant crisis that is the climate crisis that is upon us and the huge need for new infrastructure and new energy jobs, how will you ensure that the workforce development system is connected to those jobs, how those two systems work together, and kind of what are some of your priority areas within the climate movement and the climate issues that face us?
So on the climate, this the fourth existential crisis that we are facing. It is the 100-year flood that comes every 5 years. We saw the impact of that with Sandy, and there is a climate resiliency plan on which we've yet to execute. And as I think about this, if I think about what we're doing to build climate resiliency in Coney Island and Hunts Point and Lower Manhattan and other parts of the city, we need to focus on that, and we need to make sure that we have the people who can address that. We also need to focus on solar, and how can we make some of the areas here more solar friendly? How can we benefit from solar, and how can we put people to work? Train those people, train them, as I've talked about, workforce development for the jobs. Some of the jobs are the jobs of the day. If you really want to focus on solar and solar panels, let's get the people, let's train them. It's not going to take long, but we invest in that so that when we begin the solar projects, we take the people whom we've trained and put them into those projects. And let's make it focus primarily on New Yorkers. Let's get them. I don't want to bring people from the outside to do that. I want to bring New Yorkers. And I want to have designated workforce that goes into sectors like solar. We also, as part of the infrastructure, we need to build charging stations. So why don't we train the workforce, figure out how we go build charging stations, because we're going to need them even more and more as we move from fossil fuels to solar. We also can build wind energy. Let's get the experts in, let's train them so that when we go build wind farms, that those people are there and available to us. So part of this is, and I've talked about $100 million ago and 15,000 workers to train them. I'm going to train them for the jobs of the future, for the infrastructure jobs. So that's very much a part of my plan, part of my vision, but it's to get those people in the workforce, get them actively involved and trained and spend the money to do that. The payment for us is going to be extraordinary going forward. The impact on people's lives is going to be phenomenal. I get excited about this. Those are the jobs of the future. That's the city of the future. That's why I'm talking about the most inclusive growth that this city has ever experienced. That's how I think about it.
Thanks, Andy. Our last question is coming from Brian Licata. Brian is at the Staten Island Chamber of Commerce. Brian, whenever you're ready.
Hello, Brian.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Joey. So one of the issues that we're facing inside of not just the world of workforce, but everything that we're doing here is that currently we have 23 agencies that administer workforce training programs to young adults and adults around the city. There are so many redundancies, overlapping of services, which create a competition for resources, not just the actual funding for these programs, but some of these resources are actually the participants that we're all trying to get to be part of our programs. I'd be very interested to hear how you feel this could be streamlined so that we could not only optimize the services that we're providing to our young adults, but we could also make sure that we're spending every dollar in the most efficient way.
So Brian, you've identified one of the areas, one of the big to-dos, and that is to streamline this. You have so many different agencies purporting to address the same opportunity. And what happens when you have not one or two in charge, nobody's held accountable. So we continue to go on a merry-go-round, which we simply cannot do. So a priority of mine, Brian, would be to streamline, to make sure we have the right focus and that we combine as many of these programs as we can and be efficient and have a view, have a plan, and go execute on the plan. When you have as many as you've outlined here and not clear leadership, very little gets done and everybody's fighting for the same resources. So let's identify our priorities. Let's identify the leadership. Let's hold them accountable. Let's make the investment and let's move forward and execute. That's how I think about it. So you're right to point it out. In many ways, Brian, it's dysfunctional. So very little gets done. I want to make sure that it's functional. And again, that comes down to what I've been doing for, 40 years, and that is advising large companies and governments on how they streamline their processes so they can grow. So we need to do that. And you're right to point it out. And it needs to be a high priority, the highest priority. Anything's going to get done, we need to focus on that.
Thanks, Brian. And Ray, thank you for your thoughtful responses today to what is a wide range of questions. You've heard from the critical issues in our community and across the workforce development sector. And I want to just give you these remaining few minutes to just make a closing statement, if you will, and share anything that you haven't already done so with our community.
But thank you for that. On October the 15th, I called my 94-year-old mother and told her I quit my job. She said, "Boy, you have lost your mind. What's happening here? I thought you had a good job." I said, "Yeah, Mom, I have a good job. And it has been great based on the sacrifices that you have given me. But this city, the city that I love, and I love New York because I took the foundation that you gave me and I've been able to have a great experience here. I've lived here. I've been able to work here, a highly successful career. I've broken down doors for so many. I've invested in the mentors the way that my mentees, the way my mentors invested in me. But right now the city needs leadership. And I'm the only one who has the lived experiences, who has the experiences of leading and managing businesses, large businesses, and helping them grow. And the only person who has the relationships to bring public partnerships to bear, which is going to be so desperately needed. And so that's why I decided to run for the mayor of this city. And for you all, Jose and Kathleen, what this means is that I didn't get termed out. I'm not looking for promotion. My sole objective is what's best interest of this great city and the city that I love. And so we don't get it now. We're at a crisis. So all the things that we've talked about, it's not clear to me that they're ever going to get done because they haven't gotten done in the way they should get done. And I'm uniquely positioned to make certain that this is the priority. And there's a moral obligation to get this right. And it's included in my vision for the greatest economic comeback in the history of this city, the greatest and most inclusive comeback. And so many of us have not been included. And the focus that I have is making certain that that inclusion actually takes place on my watch. That is the highest priority. So I thank you all for the opportunity to speak with you. I thank you all for informing me and informing my policy, my platform, my vision for the future. Because as you will see, much of what's in my comeback, my economic comeback, mirrors what you all have outlined as necessary for this city to thrive and to thrive inclusively. So that's my commitment to you. And I just want to tell you, there's no plan B. There's no cavalry. This is us. It ain't about me. It's about we. And we need to be about the business of making this city the greatest city that exists anywhere on the planet. And we coming together can do just that. And so thank you for allowing me to help me bridge the divide from the streets to the suites, public-private partnerships that will benefit our citizens, especially the ones who look like you and me. So thank you for the opportunity. And I so applaud and admire and respect all the work that you're doing, which is essential to this great city.
Thank you, Ray. We appreciate the kind words, and we appreciate you being here with us this morning. That concludes the 8th of our conversations with the 2021 candidates for New York City Mayor. A quick program note, please join us on February 25th for the 9th of our Meet the 2021 Candidates for New York City Mayor. We'll be speaking with Councilmember Carlos Menchaca. Thank you all for joining us this morning. And once again, thank you to Mr. McGuire for being here with us